Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jim. Today's episode 229, and we're going to be interviewing Joshua. How you doing, Joshua?
Good. Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. Excited to do this as usual. So let's start off with your childhood. How was it growing up for you?
I grew up in Florida, pretty middle class family. Mom was a police officer. Stepfather was a cab driver. Average grades in school and things of that nature. Wasn't until about sixth grade that I discovered this thing called alcohol, and started drinking with, somewhat frequency, to be in sixth grade. Um,
That's really young. Sixth grade's about 12 years old, right?
right.
Yeah, that's really young. Who introduced you to it?
Just some buddies of mine had an older brother, and we ended up skipping school one day. And I remember the first time I drank, it was a bottle of Jack Daniels, and I ended up throwing up in the toilet for most of that afternoon that we had ditched school.
Did you like it when you first tried it?
Oh yeah, I definitely noted there was definitely a connection there when I first tried it. I mean, throwing up or getting sick didn't really impede my desire to continue to do it at all. So it's definitely something that I made a connection with at a pretty young age.
And that's some heavy duty stuff to be starting off with, Jack Daniels.
Yes, that was it. And that fell with me way into my adult life.
So that was your main poison, alcohol?
Alcohol and cocaine.
Okay.
As I got older and got into high school, cocaine became pretty prevalent. It slowed down for a couple of years while I was in the military. But then once I got out, I kind of returned to that too.
Going back a little bit to your childhood, how was it? How was your life like pre-drinking and then post-drinking? What changed in your life? Like before you ever had a drink, I mean, were you more active with friends or stuff like that?
I definitely think I was more friendly
Okay.
before I started drinking. I had less to hide. So I was more of an open person, enjoyed dialogues, enjoyed doing, things that, 10, 11-year olds enjoyed doing. I think once I started drinking, things became more secretive in my life. I had to begin to hide things or had to begin to start manipulating individuals or circumstances in order to not get caught, right? In order to continue to be able to drink when those opportunities did arise. So I definitely think one of the major turning points was, I began that trail of dishonesty as I moved forward without even really realizing it. Right. I mean, at 12, 13 years old, I didn't think I was paying very much attention to my intentions, right? Or why I was being dishonest. I just knew that I wanted to get away with what I wanted to get away with. And those were the means necessary to do that.
How um how frequently were you drinking?
Um, I think sixth or seventh grade, probably, I don't know, once a week, once every other week. As I moved more into my high school years, it became more of a weekly thing. Weekends, stuff like that, parties on the stuff, events.
So did you have a good social life growing up?
I did. I did. Well, I mean, I guess in hindsight, it was pretty closed off. I mean, my social life was built around, um, drinking and using. Um, and people that did that and engaged in those activities. So, I mean, I guess in hindsight, it was probably more closed off than what the average person experienced. I didn't do a lot of sports. I didn't do a lot of school clubs. I didn't do a lot of things of that nature. But I did have a friend group that allowed me to, keep up relationships, but at the same time maintain the objective of catching some kind of buzz.
So did you find yourself gravitating during like high school as you were more frequently using? Were you gravitating towards that crowd of people who used?
Right. I mean, I definitely gravitated towards the population. Then I kind of went to the restaurant industry when I turned 16. I started working um, in the locations that I was in that just happened to be a lot of drinking. a lot of drug use in that environment, just in the restaurant industry that I experienced. And so it was pretty easy to continue to obtain and participate in. Right, my friend groups got a little bit older as the people that I was working with were older than I am, so I probably had less and less high school friends and more work friends as I began that cycle, working nights, working weekends, and things of that nature.
Okay. So once you graduated high school, what were you doing with your life? Were you still in the restaurant business?
No, I joined the army.
Okay.
I recruiter. I mean, true story. I was 18 years old. I had moved out. I guess I graduated in May ish. So junior July, this recruiter comes knocking on the door. Literally had to move the beer cans out of the way. It was like a movie. The guy sits down, lays out what I could be making. I was like, well, I'm not doing anything else, anyways, and ended up joining the army. And had a really good experience in it. That was from 1993 to 1996. Had a real good time. Was actually the responsible one, oddly enough, when my buddies and I would go out drinking or things of that nature. I tended to be the driver. I tended to be the one that kind of set some boundaries or some ground rules to help get people out of trouble or avoid just some mishaps. It was probably one of the most responsible times of my life when I go back and I look at that era of 18 to 21.
So you were able to hold your life together easier.
Mm-hmm. That did not hold though when I got out at 21, 22. I got out for the first time, and it took a pretty quick downhill slide. I went back into the restaurant industry, was pursuing culinary education. From there, it kind of led me right back to drinking. I was to the point where I was, knocking off a fifth of vodka a day at 22, 23 years old.
Really?
Um, then at 25, I decided that I'd had enough and went back into the army, and where I stayed there till the end of 2010. So had a couple different experiences with that. That in between time was definitely problematic when it came to drinking and when it came to cocaine use, and the consequences that I suffered at that point in my life from my drinking and drug use.
What kind of consequences were you looking at?
Back then it was arrests, a couple DUIs. I'd lost a pretty significant relationship in my life at that time. Um, Definitely a lot of disconnect with family and friends. Very, very isolated in my behaviors and who I chose to be around.
You were very isolated. I find that a lot with drug use and alcohol use that we tend to isolate ourselves. It's just
Mhm.
like I've said this before in the podcast. Addiction is a lonely place to be.
Yeah,
You
very
feel
lonely.
like you're the only one going through it.
Hmm. Well, and it kind of gets this idea that, I thought mine was special, right? That nobody quite understood what I was going through, or what challenges that I had to maintain in order to keep that charade up, that nobody would understand, what addiction or alcoholism looked like. So, yeah. And that was, part of my recovery journey was learning that I wasn't that special, and that there is quite a bit of similarities in individuals as they progress through the disease of addiction.
Yeah. So at what age, you said you were into the military till 2010. What age was that when you got out? How old were
So it
you?
would have made me, I'll tell myself now, that would have put me at about 35, 36, just
All right,
about
so
36.
okay.
And then it went down again pretty hard, to be honest with you. I came back, I was in Iraq mid from the beginning of 2007 until first quarter of 2008. Came back, um, drinking really ramped up at that time. Ended up I was married at the time to my first wife. Um, that ended relatively quickly. That relationship did not withstand, the increase in drinking at all. And then I came to a point where it was just a better option to not be in the military. I mean, I essentially kind of moved away from what was potentially or what was on track to be a pretty stellar career. But I made the decision to, put alcohol and, my egoism in front of that, as opposed to just conforming or getting some help.
Yeah. So during your time in the military, what were some of the things that kept you sober?
Well, fear, I think, was a good one, to
Okay.
be quite honest with
I
you.
mean, hypothetically, if you were found like, with a DUI or, public drunkenness, what would happen in the military? So I know you guys go by what's it called, the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
All right, UCMJ. That was a pretty intensive boundary for me. Obviously, I didn't want that kind of repercussion or negative consequence in my life. I wanted to be able to have something, in my life that was untarnished by drugs and alcohol. And the military was it for most of it till the very end. I was very proud of my service, very happy to be in the Army. It didn't, for me, it was a positive experience.
What was your
But
job in the Army?
so I got out as a chief warrant officer too. I was a logistics warrant officer.
A
So,
logistics officer? What
mhm.
kind of thing? What would be in your daily routine?
um, so I was responsible for moving food and water and ice and other commodities around the battlefield, so to speak. Um,
Okay. That's an
so a
important
lot,
job.
yeah. So it was a lot of coordination. Your typical logistics stuff. Um, to be able to service, brigade size element, 3,000, 3,500 guys. So I had some
And
responsibility.
you enjoy doing it?
I did enjoy doing it. It was definitely a good life, and it was something that I felt that I was pretty good at.
Did you ever think about going back?
No, I'm done now. I'm 48 now. I
Okay.
think I've done all I'm going to do in those boots. So when I got out this last time, I went to grad school for professional counseling, um, and kind of moved through that rigor. Um, be honest with you, I was on a quest to try to answer my own problems and then realized I had to get a job to feed myself.
Yeah.
So, went to grad school, got my graduate degree, and did the requirements to become a licensed counselor. So, and now I work in addictions. I'm a program director for a residential treatment program, that allows me every day to participate with those that are seeking recovery or actively engaging.
Yeah. So what did you, so basically you were just getting into the public sector in 2010. What did
Mhm.
your drinking at 2010? How was your drinking once you got out of the military? Because you said towards the end you were pretty bad.
Yeah, it was heavy. I mean, I was probably drinking, ooh, almost a fifth of Canadian Mist a day. Um,
A fifth
I
is
went,
the big bottle and the wide bottle, right?
yeah, the
Yeah.
wide bottle.
Believe it or not, I was an alcoholic. I never looked at the size of the bottle. I just grabbed the biggest jug with the handle. I just called it
Right.
a handle.
Yeah.
I think it was 1.75 liters. Is that right?
Right. Right.
Okay, yeah. So I do know.
Yeah. So I had a couple of years there where, uh, I was fortunate coming out of the military that I did have some money saved, so I didn't have to necessarily go straight to work. Unfortunately for me, I didn't have to go straight to work, so I sat there and drank
Mm.
pretty heavily for a good 6 months. Got another DUI. Just pretty much had given up on everything. Went through my first divorce. All those things
Did
took
you lose
place.
your license?
Driver's license.
Yeah.
Well, I had one of those work licenses.
What license?
I was allowed to drive to work.
You were allowed to drive to work. Okay.
Yeah. But then on the way to probation, I actually got a ticket for running a red light. They suspended my license.
Oh
Um,
shit.
that I was on the way to probation. But those things, were all self-inflicted. And they were all a result of my choices and drinking and continuing to live that lifestyle. Well until my mid 30s, knowing that it doesn't have the potential to bear any kind of positive results.
Yeah. So going over to the cocaine, who was the first person to introduce you to that?
Ah, man, a guy named Kevin. Um, I was
How'd you know him?
probably just he was an older guy that we used to hang out with. I was probably 14, maybe
It's
15.
really
Wasn't
young.
driving yet. So that was the first time I had done it. And then,
How did it make you feel?
pretty good, right? I mean, people do cocaine because it works, right?
Yeah, I did a lot of cocaine in my lifetime. Yeah. Towards
Yeah,
the end of my career, I didn't like cocaine as much. It just hurt my nose, and I really hate the come down. The come down
yeah,
sucks with
yeah,
cocaine.
yeah. It is,
Like
it
with
is,
Adderall, the come down wasn't so hard.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would, do the cocaine to get up and then drink to come down.
Exactly.
And then you just end up in this really weird cycle where everything is so inebriated and so fuzzy and so paranoid that nothing really seems to make a whole lot of sense. And I think it just propels ego and selfishness. At least it did for me, where I was just reaching for facts of things that I was still holding together and using it as evidence that no problem existed,
Yeah.
right? But really, it was just so much inebriation that I couldn't tell hell if I was sober or being successful or not, because every time I turned around, I was going up on one and coming down on the other.
Yeah.
So it didn't leave me a whole lot of room for rational thought or um, the ability to maintain any kind of serious insight.
So let me ask you this. At the height of your consumption, how much cocaine were you doing? I know you said you were doing about a handle a day of the lit. What? So it was called Canadian Mist. Real quick, going back to the liquor.
Yeah.
What's Canadian Mist? What is it? Is it like a
Um,
vodka? Is it a bourbon?
it's like a whiskey. It's a
It's
Canadian
like a
version
whiskey.
of
Okay.
whiskey. Um,
Yeah, I like
there
the
was a
liquors.
point in the cocaine consumption where, I mean, I was doing a couple $100 a day um, of cocaine. I mean, it was quite extensive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cocaine is a hell of a drug, just like Rick James said on the Dave Chappelle show. It'll
right.
get you, man, because
Yeah,
it makes you feel invincible, like $1 million.
yeah,
But it only feels like that for so long.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's an IQ test. If you're doing it, you fail, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and then and a lot of things I hear, like you just said, is so many people mix it with drinking. I did all the time. We go out to the bar in New York City because I live in Jersey and I used to work in New York. So get some cocaine, be snorting it in the bathroom, then go out to the bar, have a couple shots, and that
mhm,
would bring us down a little bit. Like you said, go have some more cocaine to bring us back up. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's a pretty insane cycle. Um, to be involved in. And, it creates, for me, it did anyways, it created a lot of tunnel vision. I wasn't able to see anything outside of that circle or see anything um, positive because I was constantly either induced happiness or just dreading life, looking to get happy again. But normal things, like, taking a walk in the park or things like that, didn't really bring any kind of serious joy to my life, anyways, when I was in the throes of
yeah. We kind of lose, like you said, the blinders go on, and we lose sight of everything in our lives that was once important to us, or the things we used to enjoy, things we used to do.
it.
It's amazing how it destroys us from the inside out.
Very much so. Well, I mean, it's a soul killer. Not only is it's bodily and physically damage from the inside out. I think it's the spiritual damage for me that was done um, was probably the greatest thing to overcome. I was fortunate and a pretty healthy guy. I was able to move past the use and resume some healthy activities and begin to make up for some of that detriment. But it took a good many years for me to get past the spiritual hole that I had dug and put myself in by just the continued use. That was definitely a more difficult part of the journey.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, a quick question. When you did your drugs and the alcohol, did you prefer to do it alone or are you doing it with people?
Uh, I started out as a young man preferring to do it with people. By the time I was at the height of my use, I would go home, lock the door, close the blinds, and that's where I stayed until I ran out.
Yeah.
Um, I had no desire, excuse me, I had no desire to be around other people or the idea of sharing or of it being kind of a party mentality really didn't exist. It was something that was done in isolation, and I think that contributed, to the spiritual hole because I had really cut myself off from anything or anybody that could bring elements of positiveness or any kind of insight to what I was doing. I had closed that hole to such a point that the only thing that I was allowing to filter in was the drugs and the alcohol.
Yeah. So what was what you consider to be your rock bottom?
Oof. You know, um, I'd lost a really good job. Um, had made some really, really tough um, choices in my life that were definitely impactful to those around me. Um, as I began to really start affecting others besides myself. And, I just hit this point where I was like, I'm done. Um, I just couldn't do it. I physically just couldn't do it anymore. Um, I remember going to the bathroom and my pee was so brown. Um, just from the dehydration and all of the liquor and stuff like that.
Really, it turns your pee brown? I never had that.
I mean, it was just horrible.
Was it,
Uh,
were you bleeding?
I don't even know, to be quite honest with you. It ended up clearing up as I quit drinking, so I assumed that there was a relation there.
Yeah,
Uh,
I would be
but
terrified if that happened to me.
yeah, I mean, I just really got to this point where I was like, man, what do you do? I mean, I had lost that. I'd already lost a military career. I'd already lost two wives at that point. I was on my way to losing a third. And that was just enough for me to say, hey, man, I got to do something different. I was fortunate enough to have the resources to go to treatment and get into a treatment program and be able to use those resources and start building that skill set that I needed to be able to not only be sober, because I managed sobriety for a few years throughout that. What I didn't manage to do real well was recovery and actually changing the way that I think about life and the way I see things. I was still very self-centered, very, very ego-driven, even though there were points within there where I wasn't using.
Yeah. So how was it your how has your recovery been since what's your recovery date? How long you sober?
So just under 6 years.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a long, long time, my friend.
Yeah. So it's been good. It's been tough. I'd say the first 12, 18 months was pretty rough, where I did some white knuckling and things of that nature. Still didn't want to surrender to a higher power. Didn't want to um, give up the self-centeredness um, that it takes to really live, in my opinion, to live a recovered life and to not have to live in that darkness anymore. I was pretty bitter for about a year. This idea that I wasn't going to be able to drink anymore, I wasn't going to be able to use anymore. I was pretty angry about it, to be quite honest with you. Even though I knew, and I guess that's what makes it so baffling and cunning, right? Is even though I knew how bad it was for me and where it took me, I was still angry that it wasn't a part of my life.
Isn't it crazy how the addict mind works?
So it's insane, man. It's insane.
So many times I sat there drinking, saying this is bad for you. You don't even enjoy it. You cry half the time because you're so depressed from the
Right.
drinking. But yet the next day you go out and buy a bottle.
Yep.
So what's life like for you nowadays?
Life now is good. Like I said, I'm a licensed counselor. I'm working in a long-term residential treatment program where I get to work with, folks that are coming in and recovering every day. I work my own personal program. Besides that, a partner and I is also in recovery. We just started Simply Sober, all right, which is kind of an apparel line, a lifestyle line that we're working on that we launched at the end of last year. So, I've got good connection with my kids again. All right, they're able to come over and really kind of participate, not only in my life, but I'm able to participate in theirs, which is a pretty big deal. Because there was a time where I had shunned that and kind of closed that door to them. And my children are pretty young. I mean, they're 15 and 11. So, um, so being able to kind of begin to right some of those wrongs and begin to make up what it is that I need to make up to them on a daily basis is pretty important and pretty gratifying. So, but overall, I mean, I still have my days where I struggle. I wish I could say that I wake up and don't reckon or don't ever have the thought of wanting to use in the context of, hey, this would be nice, or remember when. I think it takes a lot of discipline on my part to kind of get back into those fundamentals um, as I continue to move forward in recovery and keep working with people and other people in recovery, whether they're early recovery or long-term recovery, has really been key for me. It kind of allows me to bring the memories of that misery up and not let them be so distant.
It's good to keep in mind what we once went through, so we know we don't ever want to go back.
Exactly.
Yeah. So getting towards the end here,
Mhm.
did you have any tips or tricks for people that are watching and listening that you can, give them, advise them on?
The sooner you surrender, the sooner you will get better. If I had to say one thing about my recovery and the people that I see with recovery that I want, it's honesty. The big book talks about rigorous honesty, and without it, there's no way to get sober. At least there was no way for me to get sober. I found myself lying over stupid stuff. Like, did I watch the game last night? Or, did I see something? I mean, oh yeah, sure I did. Right. It's that attempt to kind of fit in or to not be judged, to be part of the in group of that conversation. Um, and I just found myself repeatedly being dishonest, with not only myself but with those around us. And it wasn't until I really kind of sat there and said, I mean, you're kind of full of shit.
Yeah,
You're kind of full of it. That I was able to get better. So I would encourage anyone who wants to get into recovery or maintain recovery that you got to be brutally honest with yourself and those around you. If not, that for me at least, um, it leads me down a pretty secretive path where um, I begin to create potential to go to my old way of thinking, to go back to that self-centeredness and to go back towards that egoism that I was living in.
yeah. So we're talking about your recovery. Sounds like you're quoting the big book. So you use a 12-step program for
I
yourself?
do. I do use a 12-step program. I've used some other different kinds of therapies too. I mean, for me, I think it's a way. It may not be the way for everyone. For me, it's been successful. So it's something that I keep as a part of my program um, and try to focus on.
That's good. So how do you feel? Looks like we're getting towards the end here.
Feel good. It's pretty interesting. This was good. This is definitely something that I would do again, and you know, it's good. It's a good experience, right? To be able to share. Hopefully, this helps someone. Hopefully, somebody's able to connect, and hopefully, somebody decides a different way of living today.
Awesome. And that's what I love to hear. So many people that agree to do these interviews, they always say, if it'll help someone, I'll do it, because that's the whole point. I know that's one reason I do this, because once I started hearing other people's stories for the first time, I was like, holy shit, I totally connect. I
Right.
totally relate to that. I've been through that. I've done the same things. So I just figured give everyone a platform to tell their story and people could listen and hopefully it helps.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thank you
did you have
very much.
anything else you want to throw in?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Love the channel. And I'll continue to be a viewer.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate it. So do me a favor and sit tight for a few minutes. And for everyone that's watching and listening, if you like what you saw and heard, go below and give us a like. Also, subscribe to see when we upload new videos. You can check us out on all social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, you name it, we're on it. I also suggest checking out our website, www.addicts-anonymous.com. There's plenty of free resources as well as free literature. I also suggest waiting for some more information on our book. I will be getting it out hopefully by the end of February, if not middle of March at the latest. It's going to be called Addicts Anonymous, Our Stories. I'll keep you posted and updated about that. So I hope you enjoyed today. And until next time.